If you want to get a band 9 in IELTS writing, you need to have your strategy for task 1 perfected. I will show you how to do that today. Firstly, we will be looking at how to analyse the data provided. Then we'll look at what structure we can use to get a band 9. And then we will write a whole response together and talk through the process step by step. We'll also discuss key grammar and vocabulary you need to know for task 1. Task 1 academic questions will always be in this format. We get information about the data, normally just one sentence, and then the instruction: summarise the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. This instruction is always the same. And then we have the data. Now, sometimes students can find the data a bit intimidating. There are lots of numbers and lines we can look at, but we need to remember that a graph or a chart is a pictorial representation that represents data in an organised manner. So it's a visual representation of raw data. They're designed to make it easier to digest data, so we need to remember that the graph or chart is there to help us and is designed to be understood easily. And if we have this mindset, it will be easier to get over any mental blocks we may have with this task. So the first thing we need to do is read the question. This bar chart shows the percentage contribution of the finance industry and the manufacturing industry to the GDP of the UK from 2003 to 2008. Now, we don't need to know what GDP actually is. It's not asking for our knowledge or opinion. All we need to do is analyse the data and report it. Then comes the instruction statement. Summarise the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. So we need to keep in mind that the key word here is summarise. The dictionary definition of summarise is to express the most important facts or ideas about something or someone in a short and clear form. Another key word in the instruction sentence is select, which means to choose a small number of things. So this means we do not need to write about every single detail we notice. Our response has to be short and clear, between around 150 to 200 words, and it says we need to report the main features, meaning the most important elements. Now let's look at the data. There are generally two different kinds of charts and graphs: dynamic and static. Dynamic charts show data over time, so they show changes, and static charts show data at just one point in time, like a snapshot of a specific moment in time. This will affect the type of data we select. We can see that this chart shows us data from a period of 6 years, showing changes over time, making it a dynamic chart. To understand the data, we need to think about the purpose of the data. This is incredibly important to think about. With what intention did the creator of the chart make it? In this instance, there are two reasons. The first reason is to compare the finance industry with the manufacturing industry, so people can look at the chart and understand the difference between the finance and manufacturing industry in terms of the percentage they contribute to UK GDP. The second intention is to show what is happening to GDP over time. What is the trend between 2003 and 2008? So now we know the two reasons, these are the things we are going to report. So let's have a closer look at the data. So if we get a dynamic graph, like this one, showing dates over time, we should look for general trends. So for the finance industry, if we look at the general trends, from 2003 it goes down, stays fairly level, and then goes back up a lot, and then back down again. But generally it's going down. So generally, the percentage of GDP that the finance industry makes up is decreasing. If we look at the manufacturing industry, it's fluctuating, but it's pretty much staying steady. It doesn't increase much from 2003 to 2008. It does fluctuate a little in between, but the general trend is steady. One super common mistake students make is to overthink the data. Just think of a trend line. If you had to hold a ruler on top of the graph, would it be sloping up, staying level, or sloping down? That is the level of detail that the examiners are looking for in this task. Do not be tempted to overcomplicate it. Then we can look at what the highest and lowest values are. As we can see, the finance industry's contribution to GDP skyrockets in 2007, so we should probably mention that. And if we look overall, it's easy to notice that over this period, the finance industry makes up a larger percentage of GDP than the manufacturing industry. This is when the idea of comparison comes into play. So when we start writing our report, these are the main things we are going to discuss. Let's look at how we are going to structure our report. It's so much easier for us to plan our report if we have a step-by-step structure, breaking up every single element we need to include. We always start with our introduction. Now, what we always need to do is look at the first part of the question, which is usually just one sentence, and paraphrase it. And that will be our first paragraph. The chart illustrates the portion of the UK's GDP made up by the finance and manufacturing industries between 2003 and 2008. So how did I paraphrase the question? Remember, paraphrasing involves using synonyms and word reordering. So bar chart to chart, a bar chart is a bar chart. You can't really have a synonym for this, so it's fine to use the word chart, and you can keep or leave out the word bar. Shows, you can use the word illustrates like I did here, or you can use displays, presents, depicts. Percentage contribution, we can change that to the portion made up by, because in this instance, contribute means to constitute a part of. And we can do a bit of word reordering. Instead of saying of the UK, we can use a possessive apostrophe S, the UK's GDP. It could be argued that this sounds a little less formal than saying of the UK, so you could just keep it like that, but using the possessive S is perfectly acceptable and allows us to more comprehensively paraphrase the question. And I've changed from 2003 to 2008 to between 2003 and 2008. So our first paragraph will just be one sentence paraphrasing the question. Now we have our introduction, we can go on to the next paragraph, which is the overview. Now the overview can be the second paragraph or the fourth paragraph after our two key feature details paragraphs. The only thing that matters is the content and the quality of the overview, not the order in which it appears. We cannot get a band 7 or higher without a good overview. It's impossible. So that shows just how important it is to get this part right. We can always start the overview with overall, comma. This clearly indicates to the examiner that this paragraph is your overview paragraph. This is why putting in discourse markers is so key. You are directing the reader through your report so they know what to expect when. In our overview, we summarise 2 to 4 of the most significant things we see and write about them in general terms, not using any specific numbers or data from within the graph. So just the most obvious things that stand out when we look at the chart, the most important pieces of information about the data. So as we discussed, finance generally decreased and manufacturing fluctuated, and finance's contribution was generally higher over the whole period than manufacturing's. Overall, the contribution of the finance industry to GDP declined steadily throughout the period, while the manufacturing industry's percentage fluctuated. So here we are describing that finance declined and that it was a steady decline throughout the period, and then we compare that with manufacturing, so its contribution fluctuated. And we are comparing the two industries and showing the general trend, with two general trends and a comparison. Let's write the next sentence of our overview. Despite this, the finance industry's total share of GDP remained larger than that of the manufacturing industry. So remember, we are looking for the most obvious, most important features. Many people trip up at this point as they overthink the data. They get caught up in finding little details that they can talk about to impress the examiner. They think that writing an overview as simple as this is not going to get them a high band score. They think it needs to be complex and ultra thorough. This is not the case. Remember, it's meant to be a summary reporting the main features. So avoid overcomplicating it and just look at the most obvious points to talk about. This is what will get you a high band score. Avoid getting stuck in the weeds by going too granular. So now we've already written 2 of our 4 paragraphs. It's really not as tricky as it seems. So now we go on to our first of 2 details paragraphs. We can see that our overview doesn't contain explicit data, any numbers. So this is what we'll talk about in our details paragraphs. We're digging down a little deeper. So how should we structure our details paragraphs? Well, in this instance, it's fairly clear how we can do this. So what we're going to do is write about finance in detail and then manufacturing in detail. One thing the examiner is going to grade you on for coherence and cohesion is the organisation of your report and how easy it is to read and understand. Is the structure logical? We can see that it is logical to talk about finance and then about manufacturing, and if we need to make comparisons, we can do that within the paragraphs, and I'll show you how we can do this. The finance industry accounted for just under 15% of UK GDP in 2003, but fell to around 11% in 2004 and 2005. So what I've done is I've divided the data into chunks. The first chunk I've taken for my finance paragraph is from 2003 to 2005, and I've described it in detail. So it's very high at the start, it moves down and then stays around the same. We do not need to point out the minute difference between 2004 and 2005. As long as we use qualifying words like around, we can say that the data stays level. If I just said the GDP contribution fell to 11% in 2004 and 2005, I would be incorrect because this isn't precisely true. For task 1, qualifying words like around, about, approximately, just under, just over are so important as they help us convey the information accurately, especially when the exact figure isn't completely obvious, which is often the case with these types of charts. These words allow us to approximate data without being incorrect, which is crucial in academic writing. So we can see that I've just focused on the first chunk in this sentence. Do not try to deal with everything at once. So the next thing we can do is describe the dip from 05 to 06 and then the big leap in 07. After the contribution more than halved in 2006, there was a massive resurgence to a high point of just over 20% in 2007 before receding to around 7.5% in 2008. So we can see that I'm not giving every percentage for every year. Remember, we need to summarise and select data as per the question. We shouldn't report every single data point possible. So we need to think about the most significant information. In this instance, I'm highlighting the highest point and talking about the recession afterwards. These are important parts of the chart to discuss. So we've given all the information necessary about the finance industry. Let's move on to manufacturing. In 2003, the manufacturing industry constituted around 4% of GDP of the UK, then rose significantly to more than 10% in 2004 and 2005, before falling back to close to 2003 levels in 2006. We can see from the chart that 2004 and 2005 are similar levels, as are 2003 and 2006. So this is me describing those changes. Let's go on to describe the next chunk. In 2007, there was another dramatic increase to just under 9%, before returning to around 4% in 2008. So now I'm going to finish this paragraph off by comparing more specific data between finance and manufacturing. 2004 was the only year that the manufacturing industry percentage contribution to the UK's GDP exceeded that of the finance industry, with values of slightly over 11% and slightly under 11% respectively. Respectively is a really useful word and is generally considered to be a C1 or C2 vocabulary level. So I would advise getting familiar with it and learn how to use it properly. So that's us done. As we can see, if we break it down into this structure step by step, it's really so much easier to tackle. Let's just highlight key vocabulary that you need to know. So we need to describe data and general trends over time. So we can use to decline steadily, to fluctuate, decrease, resurgence, receding or recession, to rise significantly to more than, to fall back to close to, dramatic increase, values of slightly over. This task is just about describing data, so we need to learn how to do that with key descriptive vocabulary. And again, we need to remember the importance of accuracy, using words like just under, around, just over, approximately, slightly under. So if you can understand the data, describe it clearly and accurately, pick out the key features, and use the appropriate grammar structures and vocabulary correctly, then you massively increase your chances of getting a high band score. My next video will be discussing how we can get a band 9 in IELTS Writing Task 2. Subscribe so you don't miss it, and let me know what IELTS videos I can make that would be helpful for you in the comments.